What do you think we could all do to be better humans tomorrow?
I think we just have to bring sort of logical thinking and thinking for ourselves back to the table. I think that a lot of people out there have given up a lot of the tools they were brought up with to be a part of the popularity mob, and it's not really going to serve you well. And I think it's important to know that there's a lot more people out there that feel the same way that you and I do, but a lot of the issues that everyone's sort of struggling with. And, while you can go through life sort of jumping in line or jumping into the moving water, the stream with other people just to be a part of the popularity or jump on the bandwagon or whatever, save yourself some trouble. At the end of the day, you're going to look back and you're not going to be happy with yourself. You're going to regret it, and you're not going to be able to make a positive difference. You're just not. And I think if more people are willing to sort of bring a lot of logical thinking and thinking for themselves back and, doing what they know is right in their heart, I think the world will be a better place for everybody.
How did it all begin? Actually, let's just jump into it. So,
Sure.
I was reading your bio, and entrepreneur. You had restaurants. There was a few other companies that you're in. Are you still doing that?
Yeah, so I've still got one restaurant left. I tried to get out as quickly as I could. It's kind of funny. I hung on 2 weeks, right? It'll just be 2 weeks. Just hang on everything. So we tried, and it just kind of got worse and worse. And we accumulated a massive amount of debt trying to keep everything going. And then we kind of got to this point where we're like, look, the juice isn't worth the squeeze anymore. It's become a level 2 opportunity, right? You know, as an entrepreneur, you vie for level 10 opportunities, and we're never really ready for them, but we get better and better and better over the years. And I've been doing this for 15 plus years. So, I was I already had one foot out the door with the restaurant stuff. And then when everything started to fall, and then they didn't let us open up again. And then I'm looking at all the debt we're accumulating, and I'm like, all right, let's try to get out of these. So we sold a few pennies on the dollar. Because you know what it was? I was like, you look at the runway and the amount of time it's going to take to get these back to even or to where it makes sense, and the amount of time I'd have to put in, the amount of money, everything like that. I'm like, the juice just isn't worth the squeeze.
Right.
And, so we just kind of started going the other way. We've got one left. We're going to hang on to it for now. And the idea is probably we'll just give it to the guys that help us build the business. They've been great to us, and I don't know what their future looks like, but I know what mine looks like. And I think if I give it to them, they'll have a good opportunity to sell it when the market maybe, improves over the next few years.
Right.
The nice thing is I don't know if you're familiar, it's in Port Credit, Mississauga. It's a nice area, but it's also growing a lot right now. So there's about 60, 70,000 homes coming in, which is bananas, just like within, 10, 15 minutes from here. So if they can hang on to it for a few more years and they want to keep operating it, puts them in a good spot. They got a bit of a nest egg for down the road. So restaurants we're trying, my wife and I are trying to pull out of. Then with respect to the other stuff, development's funny. I grew up doing construction. My dad was swinging hammers as long as I could remember. So, and it integrated well with building our own restaurants. So we, it was its own business, and it did well for us. And, it could be a grueling job, to be honest with you, but it was really good the restaurants we're doing, we're kind of trying to get out of Canada. So I've got a couple small projects left for the construction company. But we're not really taking on much right now. The only thing we're really keeping going is the media company. And it's primarily because we see the future and where it's going and what could happen again. And we just feel like we need to be a little more geographically flexible. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's kind of our big push these days.
Cool. So that's the story, right? Which is pandemic hits, and all of a sudden you're in the restaurant business. I've got a very good friend that he had just finished up opening up 2 restaurants, and the pandemic hit. And same thing, had to file bankruptcy on them, and it was a massive hit. And very unfortunate. One of the smartest, best entrepreneurs I know. I mean, this dude is like just incredible. And it was just a really shitty situation. So is this where the politics began for you afterwards? Or like you've always been a little bit of a political nut?
No, so it's interesting. Like I've always kept up with current events. Like my father and I growing up, we'd always have super interesting conversation about stuff like this. But what I found was politics did not really affect our lives prior to 2015, 2016 in a really substantial way. It was kind of like behind the curtain. I know that it was affecting us on a daily basis, but as entrepreneurs, we're kind of like, well, do I have to pay more taxes or less taxes? You know what I mean? Because when you're an entrepreneur, you sort of build a business with a 5, 10, 20-year plan based on a firm foundation that is created by some sort of political strength. There's something that says this is how things are going to be. So we can do this, because this over here that we're building, it's shaky as hell. So if this is shaky, we're in a really bad spot. So because things were relatively stable, we didn't really pay much attention to it. You know what I mean? Like I said, I was always kind of up to what was going on. I was always voting and stuff like that. But then after that third lockdown, I was like, this has got to change. I got to do something. So I really just sort of dove in head first. I mean, I had my finger on the pulse when COVID started. I was really concerned about a lot of things that were happening, but I was like, okay, well, let's see how this plays out. Because a lot of it seemed crazy. A lot of it, I'm kind of like, there's no basis for any of this. How can they continue going down this road? Yeah. And they did. So, I mean, from the start of the pandemic, I was really dialed in. But then that third lockdown is when I really started using my voice to be like, all right, let's see what we can do here, you know?
Well, I gotta say, like you were one of the few. It was very hard to have a voice during that. You know, I left Canada. Well, I moved my family to Costa Rica.
Good for you. Why'd you come back?
Well, I'm back and forth now, and we're still living there. I got to a stage where I was like, I need to leave because I can't function in this environment, and I don't want my kids functioning in it either or growing up in it. And there's a whole other story behind that and how we ended up. I mean, we weren't planning to go forever. It was like a stint, a 2 month sort of working vacation, and got there and you just kind of see like, wait a minute, I'm really trapped in this. But from day one, I mean, I was always on call it the oppositional side of COVID and the pandemic, and fighting with everyone and trying to sort of, you know, share and talk. And it became more and more and more difficult. I mean, relationships were ruptured and fractured. And, you know, you eventually get to a point where you think, well, maybe I just need to stop. And, you know, you didn't. I mean, you still have a very strong voice. And it's interesting. Did you ever get pushback? Like, I mean,
I did
and stuff like this.
I did, but it was early on. Like so the first one I did, not really so much, but then the second big video so I've been doing these videos forever. I used to do them for like entrepreneur stuff, kind of like in a very, very like micro way of kind of what you do. It's like, hey, here's my value. Here's my lesson for you. Here's what I've learned. Take it and run with it. So I've done like, I don't know, 80, 90 episodes. And then when I picked it up and started doing it for COVID, I did one on something called bamlanivimab. So bamlanivimab, if you're not familiar, is a treatment for COVID. Mm-hmm. Very effective, like super effective. Expensive, $1,000 a treatment, but super effective. And you take it once you have had the virus. So it's administered via IV. Simple, anybody could do it. And it was approved at the federal level, and it was approved in the US at the federal level. So it was being used in the US, but only like 10,000 doses. But again, almost 100% efficacy. And then in Canada, we had it approved, but they stopped it at all the provincial levels. So it was basically sitting on provincial shelves, let's call it. You know what I mean? So I'm out there saying, why do we have emergency use authorization for something when there's a viable treatment? Mm-hmm. That blew up, dude. There was people all over me. So, you know, it's funny. I always equate it to, you know, the first day was a little bit like drowning. You know, if someone says, hey, Jonathan, you're an asshole. All right, man. Like, cool, thanks. You know, it runs through you like a wave. You feel it, then you move on with your day. You don't really care. But when you open your phone, and there's like earlier when I said I don't use the notifications anymore, when you open your phone and there's 200-300 people that are ripping on you, saying you're on the wrong side of history, you're gonna kill people. I'm just like, oh, so for like 2 days. For like 2 days, I was like, okay, just trying to tread water, keep my head above it. But then I was like, oh yeah, I don't really care. I don't really care what anybody thinks. And I was like, I know that I'm correct in this case. So I continued to plow forward. But what that helped me do was it helped me sort of reorganize how I was putting my thoughts together. So what I was doing was so what I did after that, I should say rather, is I would have this idea or whatever was going on. I'd grab all the facts and all the data. And then once I had sort of written something, I would go through it again and I'd go, how are people going to rip this apart? Where are all the holes? And then I'd fill them all. And then I was like, okay, let's see what happens. And honestly, like, usually the worst thing that happens is someone says I'm an asshole or you're a dick or you're whatever, you're some tinfoil hat, whatever. But no one's had a reasonable argument. So no, I haven't had a lot of good pushback, if that makes sense.
That was the biggest frustration, which is, you know, you can't argue with, you know, non-rational, illogical, circular type of positions, right? It's like, well, you just think that way because you are X. And it eventually it's difficult. My buddy once said, and it's a great line, which is it's very difficult to change a liberal mind. And you know, I think it's ironic, right? So let's go to the state of affairs of Canada now. Thoughts about Canada, what the next sort of, you know, 2 years look like.
That's such a big question. So I'll kind of go at the political side first, then I think it'll cascade into other things. I think what's interesting right now, you kind of touched on it, is like what it used to mean to be liberal. It's no longer what it is anymore. It's not open-minded. It's not everybody have their own thoughts. It's very dogmatic, and it's a religion. Like you said, you can't change their mind anymore. They believe with blind, they have like blind faith in it. You know what I mean? So you can't argue with that. And they've got a lot of, they own social media, and they own mainstream media, and obviously they own politics. But what's interesting to me is they're using the new state of the liberal world to just employ all these really dangerous strategies and policies that people that are liberal don't really see coming. They're like, well, you're squashing all these voices, but it's good for me because I get what I want. And that's how they're ushering these things in. And, with a lot of the censorship stuff with, Trudeau's just, he made himself a king. Like, he just has a pseudo coalition. Now he's passing all these policies and doing this stuff. Like, the dental care thing cost us $14 billion. People are like, oh, well, it's good. It's like, honestly, the way that they're rolling out is really terrible. And second of all, that was never a liberal policy. It was an NDP policy. And the reason it went from like 6 to 13 or 14 billion is because Trudeau wanted Singh to back him on this China collusion or China election interference thing. So I'm like, you look at how our tax dollars and how they're being weaponized, and how the liberals are just kind of gaining power to do whatever they want. I think it's put Canada in a very precarious situation. Mm-hmm. Our federal budgets are looking at like $500 billion now. They're just going to continue digging into debt. They've got no real way out and no real plan. Mm-hmm. I also think, with this pseudo coalition, you've got this weird thing where if people are like, oh, we need an early election. If you see an early election, you got to run the other way, because the only way you're going to see one is if Trudeau knows he's going to win, or at least win a minority and maintain this coalition. So that's very dangerous. And if not, my concern is that Trudeau goes, okay, well, let's burn it to the ground by giving as many things as we can away to social programs, which, look, I'm for a lot of social programs. I really am, just not the way we're doing it here, and not to the detriment of the rest of the country. So if he continues to do these things by 2025 and then Pierre Poilievre gets in, the reality is he's going to be handed such a mess that he's going to be the bad guy, because he's going to have to repeal so many things. So you might have 4 years of conservative, then you're kind of back to this liberal hamster wheel again. So that's kind of how I see the political side of things, which doesn't give me a lot of hope. With respect to the state of sort of the economy, I mean, as well as I do, it's there's an interesting thing. They try to tell us that it's not that bad. If you look at the States, soft landing, Biden economics, it's not so bad. We're just too stupid to understand. But if you look at the wave of strikes, major strikes, if you look over through history and you look at all the major strikes that happen around these things, it's interesting. We've had over 100 major strikes in the United States and Canada this year. And it's only October. There's only 40 last year. So that's a sign of a really, really bad economy, because if things are bad, but people can manage, they'll manage. But when things are so bad they can't, they have to strike, or other things like that in life, So, with the sort of path we're on and the way that we're spending, I don't see Canada's economy getting strong for quite some time. I mean, I know we like to use immigration to pump up our GDP, but the rate that we're doing it at and how we're doing it, it's not really a strong. That's exactly it. I guess the one thing you could say about Canada, if you wanted to sort of see the silver lining, is that for most people, if you can keep your head away from a lot of this stuff, your quality of life is not bad, and you've already got a home. That's about it. But like all these other things with inflation, groceries being up 300% since Trudeau got in, everything else that's climbing, it's going to be another year before the interest rates start dropping. I mean, I find it pretty untenable. And I think what's going to happen is immigration is going to continue to stay high. Pierre is still pro-immigration at a high level anyway. He's pro-big government, pro-immigration. So, which inherently aren't bad. It's just where we're at right now. It's not great. I think that a lot of the high performers, like you and I, exactly, we're going to leave. And then what you're going to see is you're going to see Canada's population hover around 40 million, maybe for the next few years. But what's going to happen is you're going to be bringing in a lot of, I'm not sure if it's going to be asylum seekers or refugees or just immigrants. You're going to be bringing in a lot of them, and then you're going to be losing a lot of the high performers. Right. And I think it's going to change sort of like the face of Canada in a sense. And I don't mean the physical. I just mean like kind of what the power and the strength the country had, and the innovation and the entrepreneurship and the ambition. I think a lot of it's going to be gone. That's why our plans to get out of here. To be honest.
It's crazy. So I grew up in South Africa. We immigrated.
Nice.
Why? Because you move to a stable place where, as you said, the economy is good and there's growth and good immigration policies, et cetera, et cetera. And I find it ironic that I'm sitting here at the stage of life that I'm now, looking at, like, again, the exiting of Canada, which is scary, very scary, right? I mean, look, I still run my business out of Canada and the US, and I think I've been fortunate over the years to make certain strategic decisions with the business by being incorporated in different countries. And we run these, we're all amalgamated between the intercompany, but we're quite separate. And I think, man, thank God that happened, because without that, I don't know where we might be right now. Right?
Yeah.
So where are you planning on going, by the way? Can you share?
It's a weekly conversation I have with my wife. It's funny. So
Costa Rica, by the way, Costa Rica.
Yeah. So we used to live in the Cayman Islands. So we were in Cayman for 3 years, in 2011 to 2014. Loved it. It was the best time of my life, dude. I mean, it was a different time in my life. So the currency was, we had bars and restaurants, so the currency was drinking and having fun, which is great. But obviously, you grow up, things change. But it's like a suburb. It's like a suburb of Florida. That's what Cayman's like. It's expensive to go there in vacation, but once you're there and you acclimate, not so bad, right? The value of their dollar is higher than the U.S. Static 25%. So strong economy, no taxes, no double taxation, non-disclosure on corporations. So Cayman for me is great. The only challenge is it's a bit of a retirement home, if that makes sense. So I'm kind of like I want to go back. I just don't know. Like, I'm 38. I don't know if I want to go now or maybe go in like 10, 12 years. So the other place we're looking at is Texas. We're looking at just living outside of Austin. And there's a reason. The reason for that, like, there's pros and cons everywhere. You know what I mean? But the value there is there's so many great subcultures. There's your jiu-jitsu subculture, your comedy subculture, your live performance subculture, tech, entrepreneurship, podcasters. I mean, it just continues on. And I believe, like, we have to go visit for a couple of weeks, but I believe that there's a lot of people like you and I there that really makes it enticing. I want to go be a part of that. I'm like, like I said, for the next 10, 12 years, while I'm still brimming with ambition, as long as that lasts, I want to be in sort of an environment that's thriving and not really retiring. So those are our two main choices right now. A couple things right now with the states, though, we're not 100% sure on is they have a big censorship bill going through the Supreme Court right now.
The same as Canada's?
So very similar. So what they did there was, Canada's wild. Canada's wild. So
let's go there for a sec. I mean, this censorship bill in Canada it's mind-blowing.
Yeah. So Canada did this funny thing where they used 3 bills. They used C11, C30, C18, and C36. So C11 is the online censorship one, C18 is the Online News Act, and C36 is the, we're going to call it hate speech bill, because it's kind of what it is, right? C11, we're already seeing what that's doing with the, so C11 is the online news, the online censorship one. So that's coming, they're in phase 2 with that now. What they've just said is all tech companies, including online news platforms, porn websites, streaming services, podcasters, everything, not individual podcasters, but podcast platforms. So Spotify, whatever. They all have to register with the CRTC by November. And then at that point, they have this sweeping power to sort of dictate what goes on your platform, what's acceptable and what's not. What kind of irked me almost more than anything, well, there's a couple things. One of them was interesting is all these tech platforms have to pitch in for this Canadian media fund that's controlled by the government. So they're buying into basically government propaganda or government approved media. The other thing that irked me was that the CRTC has created this system where people can complain about something and then they can go investigate. And we know right now, and I don't mean to be rude, but the liberals are the ones complaining about fucking everything and they've got control over everything, which is challenging for me. So they can go complain about a podcast. They could go complain about Joe Rogan. They can complain about this conversation to Spotify or to the CRTC, then CRTC goes to Spotify, and then you're all of a sudden flatlined. You know what I mean? And that is insane. I mean, the Online News Act, the one that's blocking news, that's a different I think that just worked out well for Trudeau, but that I don't know if you saw that coming. I didn't see that coming till it happened.
Yeah,
So
no, absolutely. I was actually chatting about it with a buddy, which is like this is what's going to happen.
yeah,
I mean, it's the playbook that's been followed in history, which is
yeah,
you
yeah.
control the speech, the media, the information.
Well, I was just, what surprised me more than anything was that C18 was ludicrous, and I
Mhm.
knew that it would force these platforms to play ball with C11 and C36. I knew that it was sort of that was the way to glue it all together. But when they said like, no, we're not going to do this, I really didn't think they were going to cut all news. I didn't think
Mhm.
they were going to cut independence. I did not think they were going to cut global. So that was a weird one for me because it really, it's really to the detriment of the rest of us, right? And I didn't realize until afterwards. So I didn't know until after, like, this is exactly what happened in Australia in 2021, I believe. So Trudeau knew by setting this up and running this sort of this system the same way and asking for even more money than they had in Australia, that big tech would say, we're not doing it. We're going to block everything. So he effectively knew that he would either get his coffers filled for the media companies or he would block all news online and with that, the opposing narrative. So that's kind of bananas. I mean, what's happening right here? What's challenging for me is people are being a little bit stupid, and I try not to go on the attack. I try
Right.
to be like a little bit more, hey, like here's what's happening. But the reality is, anybody that doesn't see, like, look, you can disagree with a lot of things I say, and I don't really care. But can't we agree that censorship is like sort of paramount? Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? You need it for democracy. And then when you're looking at what he's doing here, like to go back to what I said earlier, he's giving the liberals all the things they want.
Mhm.
None of the speech they say is being blocked. He's supporting all of their policies and all of their initiatives, and he's squashing the voice of the opposition. So they're cheering for this while it gets brought in, ushered in, but it's a weapon that's going to be used against them.
Right.
And they're just being too stupid or short-sighted to realize that, and they're letting it happen. And I mean, when they pass Bill C-36, which they've kind of curbed for now, but they're going to do it this coming year rather. It's Canada, like it's the most effective censorship weapon globally, as far as I'm concerned. All three of those bills together, you're done. They tell you what you can say. They tell the platforms where they can, what they're allowed to share and what they're not, and then they have to also pay for the government approved media. Like it's such a weapon when you see that put together like that.
I remember back in the day, the whole conversation when sort of like internet and online really started to take form. there was a there was a whole conversation of like, how do you use information as a weapon in the future, right? And this is it, right? Which is you control the information, you control the narrative. It's it's disturbing, as you said, that we're it's 2023. I mean, we live in a very modern world with intelligent people that should operate with democracy. And you use the word stupid, which is people are just being stupid. Is it stupid, or is it just the fact that people, I don't know, they're ill informed, they're just not, I mean,
I think it's a combination. I mean, if you look at the liberal talking points on these bills, they always make it like it looks like an ice cream cone, but it's really a punch in the face. Like that, I see what they're doing, but there has to be a certain amount of logic applied to everything that you see. And if we were as like, if we're sort of on the other side of the fence and the people they're passing a bill, you and I would have the wherewithal to understand it, whether it's conservative or liberal, because I think there's good value on both sides. I'm politically agnostic. I don't really care. I'm like, what makes sense? Policy by policy. This is silly. So that's actually how free thinkers are. If you're really politically aligned all with one party, you're not a free thinker, because there's a lot of crap on both sides. So yeah, there is a little bit of stupidity involved. There's like this blind dogmatic approach that, I've started calling it stupid a little bit now, because I guess I'm getting a little fed up. But when you look at how these things apply, there's no person just using logic that would be like, well, I could see CBC yesterday. I'm liberal. I could see CBC or Global News yesterday, but now I can't. And then you're like, well, the tech platforms are blocking it. You got to go, well, why? And and then you go, oh, well, the government wants Meta and Google to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to these news platforms, and you go, well, that's a little crazy. So if people can't identify that and don't see that, for how it's like, I say you can pick someone up so many times till you're just dragging them. And for me, it kind of feels like one of those situations where you're like, hey, like, how much more do you need? Like, I know that they're making it look like the ice cream cone, but at the end of the day, the world is so loud and there's so much political divisiveness that there's no way that people can't see what's going on. There's no chance.
I think that's the major problem in the world that we have today, which is just decisiveness. I find every topic is decisive, right? And even when you don't want to be decisive, as you said, politically agnostic, you're forced into some sort of, side. And it's, I put this up on my my profile on Instagram early in the pandemic, which was one of the lines was encouraging dialogue, because it's something I believed in tremendously. Like the whole world of debate. Right? Let's take this topic and let's debate, right? And you discuss it and you debate it and you share your point of view and your facts, whether it be like an actual debate in school or whether it is two people sitting over a table and discussing. Historically, both parties were able to walk away and be like, okay, you know what? I kind of disagree, but that was an interesting conversation. And that's what's missing in the world today. The interesting conversation, the dialogue, tell me more about why you feel that way, or where these thoughts come from, or where this opinion comes from, and exploring it. And people have stopped seeking to understand and gaining insight. It's as you said, the blinders are on.
Yeah.
And it's full force ahead.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, they're not willing to have a conversation when you can't talk about something. That's we're in a very dangerous place in society. It's like there's so many liberal issues you just can't even speak on, and you can't even ask a question, or else you're a bigot, you're a hater, you're anti this, whatever it is. And for me, that's a huge, no one grew up this way. Anybody that's utilizing this set of tools right now against people like us, you were not brought up that way. You've taken to these tools very recently because they were just introduced. Correct. And for you to forget your entire history and just pretend that this is the way things are, like I can't see that anymore. And it's, a good example was the 1 million March for Children that happened just the other day.
Right. 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. And it was, depending on the channels you pay attention to, but it was substantially larger than the counter protest. But what I found interesting is I did a little piece on it, was like, it was a very diverse group of people from all different religions, and some people that even are religious, going, hey, we just don't want this stuff taught to our kids in school. We don't want the gender ideology stuff. We don't want them having shared washrooms. We want to know what's going on with our kids' gender in school. But that's it, just in school. We don't want to erase it from the world. We want you to be who you want to be. Everything's fine there, but take it out of schools, leave it with the parents. That's the end of it. And, that was their mandate. And then what it became on the counter protest side was this straw man argument of being like, it's anti-hate. It was the anti-hate group, rather. It's hate, it's transphobia, it's anti-LGBTQ, blah, 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 blah. These people are right-wing, they're conspiracy theorists, they're tinfoil hat. You'd go on and on and on. And it was just interesting because they had to distort so many facts to build support for their side, to make any sense of it at all, so they could recruit troops to go out there and argue about things. And it's just that whole thing about not having a conversation. So people stick to their silos. They don't talk to each other, because if there was a leader from both sides, they both went and chatted, they go, oh, okay. So you just don't want them teaching it to kids that are, in grade school.
Yeah.
Seems reasonable. You guys aren't against anybody. You just don't want this stuff happening in schools. Well, that's okay. So that has nothing to do with what these other people are counter protesting about. And I think that's just sort of like an example, a highlight of exactly how all of these things have played out lately. It's just, they're in these separate silos. They lose track of really what's going on. They come together and it's just this big headbutt, and unfortunately,
even the term.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, even the terminology, like this was the march for a voice, and they were met with a counter protest. And if you just sit back and examine those two pieces, which is like, okay, one is not trying to fight, one is trying to communicate, and the other is oppositional. And this is, look, it happened with the truckers as well, the truckers convoy. I mean, when that happened, that's when I was really, really shocked at the result of all of that, right? Which is the consequence for expressing and marching and driving. And regardless of what side you were on, I think, in a democratic free country, protest is part of your rights, right? The ability to express and to share your voice. And back to it, in historical times, what's most likely happened is there's been these marches, And there's been dialogue afterwards. And again, for the first time, we're not seeing the dialogue, and it's fucking a problem. And I scream at people. I'm like, the best thing we can do is we could go in and have a conversation, right? Fight a little bit, argue a little bit, but have the conversation. But you cannot cut the conversation off. Can't be like, well, you're an idiot and that's it. I'm not talking about this anymore. And that's become the argument ender, right? That's the illogical argument.
Yeah, they throw one inflammatory term at you and threaten to cancel you, and everyone goes, "Oop, all right, I'm out of here." And you're just like, "What? Okay." Like, I mean, obviously, you and I don't care. We operate in our own little world, so we can afford to have people say stuff like that to us and try to cancel us. But yeah, it's weird. They've weaponized a lot of these terms, which has been pretty interesting to see, and it just created a lot of fear, and it has really created a very silent, large majority, which I think is really interesting. I've never seen anything quite like this in my experience. And I'm not sure how often this happens throughout history, but it seems like, given the 1 million March for Children, or, even just sort of like using my growth on my platform as sort of a proxy, it's interesting how that scaled up over time, and people were just like, more and more people were like, I've had enough of this crap, but no one else was saying anything because you had these other people on the left, weaponizing terms, weaponizing speech, canceling people. So people are just afraid. So they either stay out of it or just, I guess, hope it will end. I mean, I don't know. I mean, for me, I guess, back to your question about Canada, that's one of my big concerns. As long as these terms are weaponized, and as long as they can utilize these tools to, sort of cause not only censorship, but self-censorship, I don't know how we turn the ship around. I just have no idea.
I was going to ask you about independent media. I mean, by definition, you're an independent media company now.
Yeah.
How difficult is it for you to navigate the waters as that type of business in Canada?
Well, it hasn't been too hard yet. So, certain things have been challenging. So I've taken on a lot of the work myself. So I'm working in probably 12, 13-hour days right now. So I'm not sure if you're getting the newsletter, but
I just signed up for it. So
nice.
let me go click on it. And I was expecting to go to the website, and it took me a minute. I'm like, okay, join now. I'm like, okay, why haven't I been kicked into a page? And then I realized, it's email format, which is pretty smart, by the way. I thought this is a good business model and strategy for what you're doing.
So I've kind of got this. I'll explain the whole thing to you. So it took me a couple of years to figure out which angle to take here. I was like, okay, the next big move we make is going to be like a 20-year move. And I feel like impact is really important. So I'm like, how can I make a move that gives me the geographical flexibility, creates the right impact, and I can continue to build and grow on? So independent media sort of was the winner. And I think also there's such a strong need for it. So Blender News is sort of the first big kick at it. And what we're doing is we have, the 6 days a week newsletter, which I'm doing myself right now. I like it. I mean, I'm so tapped into what's going on, and the bad news doesn't really shake me. I kind of built like this armor through COVID that none of that stuff bothers me. I'm just like, all right, it's crazy, but here's my thoughts. So the idea of Blender is we kind of take the right and the left and we put them together to sort of give you a reality of what's going on. And I'm covering topics on everything. So Canada and the United States are the focus. Obviously, I lean into politics because I like it. It's interesting, but we're covering world. We're covering a bit of sports because I'm a meathead. I played sports my whole life, longevity, science, and everything like that. So it's a full newsletter. And then over time, what we're going to do is I'm going to be launching a podcast called Blender Report. It's going to be kind of like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Real AF with Andy Frisella or The Problem Dave Smith. I don't know if you ever listened to either of those two podcasts. It's an interesting format. So there's like two guys. One of them's kind of bringing up the topics and they're going through things. And then I'm there kind of sharing my thoughts and opinions and expanding on it. So it'll be, the news with a little more, like you and I are chatting, a little more fun, a little more interesting, And then we are going to launch a website as well. So the website will be full news website. It'll probably be up the next 1 or 2 months. I kind of wanted proof of concept before I jumped in there. And then at that time, I'm going to scale the team up a little bit, have a few more people doing some writing for me. Now, so it'll be website, daily newsletter, which like you said, is important. I really want to be able to grab people's information. And the reason is really because if I can scale this up properly, if I can do a really good job with Blender, and I can have 3 to 5 million followers, on socials, on the newsletter, engaging on the podcast, and then we build another one. And maybe it's targeted at a different generation, whether it's Gen Z, Gen X, whatever it is. And we just kind of continue building out another platform, reorganize the messaging, maybe some of the content. Then you build another one that's got maybe 3 to 5 million followers. And you just kind of keep doing this. And then, over the next 5-10 years, if you've got 3 or 4 big platforms with strong newsletters and a strong base, strong audience, you can have financial freedom, obviously,
Sure.
But that's not really the big concern. the thing for me is you've got a voice that nobody can take from you. And what you can do is you can hold all these people to account, whether it's Trudeau, whether it's Pierre, whether it's the US, whether it's Ken, whoever it is. If you got access to 20 million people and no one can take that away from you, you can use that as a weapon to try to bring peace to the world, or at least a sound of reason. And for me, that's what I was like, that's my ultimate goal.
A weapon, you know?
Yeah. So this is very much the ultimate strategy. It's early days, but it's just been over a month. I've really, really enjoyed it. So it definitely checks all those boxes I was hoping for. It brings me joy, even though it's a lot of work, which is a good sign. Right. I've got a lot of really good support so far. So I'm going to keep going down that path. And yeah, I'm just going to try to tell the world like it is,
Did you ever think this was where life was going to go? You were going to end up becoming
zero chance.
Swinging a hammer with dad, right?
God, no, man. It's so funny. Yeah, it's funny. I never really did. So through COVID, like I was on to the next step. I was going to be into the CPG market, like consumer packaged goods, all this other stuff. Try to be a billionaire. That was the game plan. I'm like, cool, we'll figure that out. Don't get me wrong. I still love the game of entrepreneurship, and I'm just playing in a different way. But once I got into COVID and started doing a lot of the car talks, I was like, this is such a space that I love. I was like, I didn't even think I never really, I did well in school, but English was the subject that I would say I struggled with the most.
Wow, that's amazing, because you are extremely well-written and articulate and a great speaker, right? And I listened to you, and I know that you've written it and you've taken time, but I mean your thoughts and the way you put them together and express them is excellent. Really, really, really excellent, right? That's why I think I stayed following you. I was like, this is not just like interesting topics that I relate to, but like they are very well thought out conversation pieces. And I agree with you. It was never, I believe this and you should believe this as well. It's like, here's what has just flown across me, and here's what some thoughts are and some questions to ask. And I think you do that very well, where you pose those questions, those rhetorical questions, which hopefully get people thinking. And that's that's the exercise in life. I mean, this is what I teach in a lot of the leadership programs and coaching, which is for us to boil it all down. Like, can you think a little bit before you speak? And I know this sounds like common sense, like, don't put your foot in your mouth and think before you speak. But it is really, how do I engage that sort of intelligent thinking, information seeking side, and then engage in the dialogue. So the fact that you just said I wasn't very good in English is interesting.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. One thing I did learn from entrepreneurship, though, was just hard work. If you're not very good at something and you need to be, you just keep working at it. And I also think that the education system doesn't do a great job of cultivating creativity because they don't understand it on an individual level. And I think we're all creative in our own ways. I'm very much a numbers guy, but obviously I do like this creative writing when it comes to solving a problem, or when it comes to sort of putting these ideas together, because it's like this big puzzle. It becomes this strategic thinking game, and then use your words to sort of solve that problem. So that was just sort of the way I saw it, and it's not the way English was taught, really, right? In terms of, for the most part. So yeah, it was just one of those funny things. Like, you asked like what I thought the odds were, like literally zero. But getting through COVID and doing a lot of these car talks and sort of finding a voice and finding some space to sort of continue doing these things, and I was like, hey, I really, really like this, and I'm getting better and better at it. And it'll be a lifelong study, But there is one part of me now, I'll be honest, that I feel like, if I continue to stick with this and podcast goes well and the new stuff all goes well, like I could definitely see myself getting into this, take this with a grain of salt, but kind of like the Tucker Carlson space. I
was about to say the future Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, like it's, I love Tucker. We're a little divided on some of our opinions, of course, but he's great. Like, he's a great guy to study, to watch, to see how he performs. And it's this kind of a little bit theatrical. It's just, he's great. And I see that and I go, I think there's a really big space and a need for people like that. And, if I just keep chipping away at things and I continue to get better and do, keep everything in check, and I can make the time for it, I think that would be a space that I might explore in the future.
Awesome. And I know we got down a little bit of the sort of, political conversation, but I got to tell you, I'm really impressed with you as an entrepreneur. I mean, your story is one of the ability, the adaptability, which is to go from one industry to the next, right? To make those decisions in the right moment at the right time in order to progress forward. You've gone from construction into restaurants into media. And I mean, you didn't think about three different types of industries, but it goes to show you that, I mean, as an entrepreneur, skills are adaptable. And as long as we're able to apply what you just said, which is that, call it work ethic and we call it learnability, the willingness to learn and open up and continually grow. The blueprint for building businesses is quite simple.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize, they see things, they see the finished product, they don't realize, well, maybe you spent 10, 15 years acquiring the tools. But also, once you have a plan, it's pretty much just a daily list of stuff you got to do. You're like, okay, I got to do this. It's linear. It's not that, none of the moving parts on their own are overly complicated. It's just knowing how to put it all together, how to execute, and then realize that, hey, you're the head of the snake. You got to solve all the problems. You don't get to deal with anybody else. You got to sort it out. And it's just, yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about entrepreneurship, to your point, is I think it's hardwiring. I actually think that, you see a guy that's athletic and he's 7 feet tall. Well, he plays in the NBA. That's very obvious, but you see, I think entrepreneurship is just as much hardwiring as it is, the 7-foot guy playing in the NBA, but you can't see it. It's on the inside. It's just that it takes a couple of years of playing the game to see if it's right for you. And if it is, and you've got those tools and it's how you operate, then it's not like going from industry to industry. I appreciate the praise. I really do. Thank you. But I think it's just it's just another day for you and I. We just kind of go, all right, well, I've got the tools and this is what makes sense and this is what I'm going to go do. And,
Yeah, I think you described it well. I do that. You put your head down, you just drive out each day. You keep pushing, pushing. When the pandemic hit, I mean, that's, I think, one of the key things that allowed myself and the company to not just, I hate the word pivot, but pivot and actually scale during the pandemic.
Yep.
Was a little bit of like, let's pick the plan, let's keep pushing forward, let's keep pursuing. And as you said, as you have a plan, you can adjust along the way, but it's about having that plan. Very cool. I wanted to ask you, how did the car start? Like, because that became part of your brand, which is like the car talks.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Yeah.
Just a quiet spot. Like, how did that all begin?
Yes, it's funny. So when I was, when I started doing the off the cuff videos, they were legitimately off the cuff. I started doing them in 2016. I get in the car because I'd always go at, like, what would happen is I'd go from meeting to meeting to this to that to whatever. I get in the car and I want to vent. So I'd be like, here's what's going on. So I'd throw my camera on and I'd be like, I would share an idea or something that happened or my thoughts on something. And that's kind of how it started. But over time, it's kind of my safe space. It's kind of like, you can sit there and you're in this quiet, the sound is really good in there. The lighting's pretty good, and there's just really no judgment in there. And I'm not really one of those people that minds, like, I don't really care if people I can make fun of. I don't really care about stuff like that. It doesn't really bother me, but I know my best performance when it comes to stuff like that is if I have my own space. And that's the car. That's just what it is. Like you can have 10 people around you filming, doing this and that and whatever. And if it's a conversation like you and I are having, super easy. But if you're reading off a teleprompter, you're kind of acting a little bit. So you kind of want to be like, and we're not all actors. I'm not an actor. That's crazy. But when I'm in the car and I'm in that space and I feel like I'm in my own little world, nothing can really get to me. So I'm almost a little more vulnerable. So I get a better performance.
Cool.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to stick with it.
I like it. You need to brand that, right? The car in the studio, all in one shot. The car comes, it's got like a camera mount. It's got it's a Jonathan Harvey car.
It's jokes. Yeah. It's funny. There's so many people talking in the car. I'm just the one asshole that it worked for.
Yeah, no, listen, man. I think, when these things hit, they hit. And, it didn't happen without exercise and effort. But I mean, you've said it and you just said, I mean, this started 2016, 2015. It wasn't like you popped up like, a couple months ago. It's been stay the course. And that's also like, I mean, the example with the podcast, I'm year 3 into this. Right?
Oh, nice.
And you got to stay the course. And as you stay the course, it starts to take form. It starts to, catch wind. But people don't appreciate the iceberg. Great amount, right? We see the top of it, but we don't see the bottom. Jonathan, listen, man, I can chat to you all day. I know we're going to sort of be capped out in a few minutes, but just before we come to the last question, which I'll give you preview for, which is we ask all guests, what do we think we all need to do to be better humans tomorrow? So give you a minute to think about that. But for the audience, if they want to learn more about you, if they want to follow you, if they want to get the newsletter, drop all those links, and how do they get in touch?
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, my personal is just at it's Jonathan Harvey. It's on pretty much all the platforms. But the big thing to these days for me is Blender News. So that's BLENDR news.com. I took out the second E. I did that because honestly, getting all the same handles is impossible. Getting a website is impossible these days. So that was the best opportunity I had to sort of create that. And also the logo looks better with 3 letters on top, 3 on the bottom. Anyway, so Blender News right now, blendernews.com, you can sign up for the newsletter. It's daily, it's 6 days a week. And like I said, it's comprehensive news. It's just sort of everything that's going on. My take anyway, everything that I think is fun or interesting. And then, on all the socials, we have Blender News as the as our tag, but I've really only launched Instagram and Facebook, a little bit of TikTok right now. We're scaling up, so I would say probably over the next month you're going to see a lot more content. Our podcast will be going, so you'll see a lot more happening. So yeah, that would be the best way to sort of get in touch or stay informed or just kind of be a part of the wave of Jonathan Harvey.
Amazing. Well, the world needs more thought leaders and independent journalists. I think when we look at the world of media today, the one thing that has been lost is the true investigative journalist, and independent media guys like you have popped up to fulfill this role, and it's a hard role to fill, right? Because there's how do you get it out there? So I'm a massive fan of what you're doing, what you stand for, and more importantly, what your purpose is. Align with your purpose. For the audience, we're going to drop all those links in the show notes, but definitely go and follow Jonathan Harvey and Blender News. I've signed up for it. It's an awesome newsletter. And at the end of the episode, we come to an important question, as I mentioned earlier, which is, what do you think we could all do to be better humans tomorrow?
I think we just have to bring sort of logical thinking and thinking for ourselves back to the table. I think that a lot of people out there have given up a lot of the tools they were brought up with to be a part of the popularity mob, and it's not really going to serve you well. And I think it's important to know that there's a lot more people out there that feel the same way that you and I do, but a lot of the issues that everyone's sort of struggling with. And, while you can go through life sort of jumping in line or jumping into the moving water, the stream with other people just to be a part of the popularity or jump on the bandwagon or whatever, save yourself some trouble. At the end of the day, you're going to look back and you're not going to be happy with yourself. You're going to regret it, and you're not going to be able to make a positive difference. You're just not. And I think if more people are willing to sort of bring a lot of logical thinking and thinking for themselves back and, doing what they know is right in their heart, I think the world will be a better place for everybody.
Amazing. I'll add not being silent. You mentioned earlier, right? Like there's a majority, and I'm going, there's power in the majority, but we have a responsibility to not be silent. I mean,
you're right.
All history, that has been the biggest problem in society and culture is silence.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Awesome. Anyway, Jonathan, you're a gentleman and a scholar. I appreciate you. For the audience, as mentioned, go and follow Jonathan. We'll leave all the links there. As usual, if you like today's episode, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to share, and we will see you next week.